I'd just like to open the meeting on behalf of our group and Tami Photinos, our Chief Executive at Prince Charles, who's here to listen, but also to give her input as an experienced emergency department nurse before she was Chief Executive of the hospital. We're grateful to her. So to start the meeting, acknowledging that we meet on Turrbal and Yagara people land. Aboriginals were the first and earliest healers, clinicians and scientists. Medicine and science didn't start when white people arrived here. It started way before it, and we acknowledge that we meet in our land. I'd also like to acknowledge the Prince Charles Hospital Foundation, the Common Good, who have helped us with this project for the last 3 or 4 years, to the executive of the team who have facilitated it throughout, both from the managerial offices with Tami and our crew, and also Jayshree, the director of ICU, has been great, and the staff specialists, the nursing staff too. We are going to hear from former patients, one of whom has actually got COVID today, but is so passionate about this. She had an amazing result in ICU, but has got some amazing hangovers too. So despite the fact Beck's got COVID, she's sitting at home nursing a sore head, but we're very, very grateful to her, to the family members who lived through the experience, and Roneen's one of them, to her too. So a massive thank you. I think also to one of the quiet achievers here, Stein, Tronstad. Stein, many of the people in intensive care would know, was our senior physio in the cardiothoracic ICU side of things. And Stein took this project on as a PhD, and it's become so much more than a PhD. PhDs are fantastic, we learn from it, but this has to be a living ICU change where we can improve outcome for patients. That's what we're all here for, be it through clinical work, research work or whatever. But this is the interdigitation of what the patients tell us we can do better. So thanks to Stein, thanks to the nursing staff that have helped to organise this today. What I thought we'd do was, the ICU of the future is about improving the care, making sure that survival is worthwhile. Prince Charles Adult Intensive Care Service has outstanding results. The survival is something that we can all be very, very proud of. But when we started looking at delirium, we realised that patients were going home with well hearts, but perhaps broken heads. And we learned a lot from them. And this is our attempt to try and do better so that they go home and that survival is worthwhile. And this is really what we're trying to do. So we started looking at delirium and this concept of how do we minimize delirium through improving the environment. We know that drugs don't work in delirium. We're going to hear about that later on. So the whole concept is how can we make the patient journey better for the patient, but also better for the relative, and importantly, better for the staff member. A delirious patient is very difficult for nursing staff, medical staff and allied health. And if we can make it better for our nursing staff and etc., then it's good for all of us. So the delirium is a problem. We believe the dose of the environment is something that's important, that we think with your help we can fix it and perhaps reduce the incidence of this disabling condition, which doesn't stop when the patient leaves hospital. We're just going to run a brief video just now. We're looking at delirium and the ICU experience. Again, this is what patients have told us. None of this is made up. These are absolute stories. So we'll just play this down, thanks. So every image in that video clip is dramatized, but every single one of those images were what patients talked to us. We spoke to patients, we spoke to relatives and said, tell us about ICU. They all said it was fantastic. They're all incredibly grateful for the brilliant treatment they received, but so many talked about this the delirium and the hallucination. So that's the dramatization. What we're going to show next is a brief video talking to the mum of a relative who was in the intensive care. He was young, he was fit, he was healthy, he got pneumonia, and he ended up in intensive care. So we're going to roll that video and give it to you what it seems like from a mum's side of things. Thanks, Steve.
I come to mum and dad's for a couple of nights and then end up calling the ambulance. They come and checked on me and then took me into hospital, and it all just happened really quick. Next minute I was just waking up. Didn't really know where I was. Just laying there, and I couldn't really talk. And it was like a loop was going on. I could see these nurses. Well, I didn't know they were nurses. I just thought they were aliens in blue outfits or something. It was weird. The first thing I asked was, "Am I dead?" Because I think the last thing a nurse said to me was, "This is a serious issue, like life-threatening." Then mum and dad were there, and mum started crying.
When it's so close to home, it was a real eye-opener and sort of a little bit scary. Your normally fit, healthy son who hadn't been well for a couple of days and admitted through emergency and told he had pneumonia. Well, loads of people get pneumonia, treated 3 or 4 days and they're out of hospital, and that's what we thought initially. And then to get woken in the middle of the night with a call to say that he had deteriorated and was being taken to ICU so we could be closely observed, and they mentioned likelihood of survival rates, and you hear survival rates and you're like, what? They were going to contact us if they were going to put him on the ventilator, and you're laying in bed thinking, he's holding his own, that's great. And then to get that other call at 4:45 in the morning to say that he'd been placed on the ventilator and was heavily sedated, it was just so surreal. It was just like, how can this be?
That's great to hear from Rhys and Corley. I'm now going to pass you over to our friend and colleague Michael Hornby from the Prince Charles and the Common Good. Michael, he's been a huge asset to us as we've done this for the whole way through. Michael Hornby, please.
Thanks, John. It's a privilege to be here, and it's nice to sort of see Roneen and Fletch. Good to see you guys again, and obviously Beck being involved today. And I guess it was appropriate, and it feels organized, and I'm very emotional about this because it's not very often where you have the privilege to work for a charity that supports these wonderful initiatives and work with staff who are there every single day to help save and improve the quality of life. So to everyone in ICU first, I want to show my respect and say thank you so much. And most critically, that young man you saw there and that lady you saw there is actually my wife and my son, who in April of 2020, Rhys, out of the blue, got a bacterial pneumonia, and within a few hours he was in our emergency department at 11 o'clock at night. We got a phone call to say he's got a reasonable chance of survival, which we were not prepared for that. It was very difficult to deal with. So for a couple of years prior to that, I was working with John and Stein and the team on helping to raise funds for this ICU of the future. And you can imagine from my perspective that all of a sudden we were going to be the beneficiary of an ICU experience. And so I got to see firsthand what was going through, and I was conscious the whole time my son was there, and I didn't have those private moments, and the noise and the stress and the wonderful work of the ICU staff all came to reality for me. So rather than being just a wonderful project to support, I was very much in and amongst it all. So again, thank you. And what I can happily report for those of you who are interested is he is now a father. Our grandchild, Haley, was born 2 months ago. So, one life saved and another life made as a result. So to the ICU team there, thank you so much. And it's made me far more passionate now to help support you guys through all our connections to try and develop what is an astounding project, an astounding opportunity to improve on something that's already saving lives, but can not only allow patients to survive, but also potentially thrive. So again, thank you. The Foundation's been privileged to support a number of projects over the years in the ICU environment, not the least a lot of studies into ECMO, work into delirium, and of course the ICU of the future. So again, thank you. And it's a real privilege today to speak to one of my friends who's got involved with the Foundation from the worst possible experience, and that's Beck Craven. Beck has not only become an ambassador for the common good, she's also been busily fundraising by riding a jazzy push bike on a cycle ride to help us raise some funds and hitting up friends and family. So when you're involved in this stuff through the common good and the work that you guys do, it's, you know, once you're in, and it's a lifelong commitment. So Beck, can I just welcome you? Thank you so much for always being available for us to share your story, and just as a bit of a segue of the backstory here is that Beck, I think back in 2015, over in Bali, attracted a virus that sadly led to cardiomyopathy, and then Beck was on the heart transplant list. Beck, welcome to you. Thank you for sharing your story, and for everyone that's listening, Beck's role, not only as far as a patient and ambassador for us all, she's played a really
Michael, you're on mute.
Michael.
You've just gone silent, Michael.
Has that dropped out? What did I
All
get
good
up
now.
to?
All good. No, I mean, you only missed 10 seconds. You're telling us about a bike.
Sorry?
You were telling us about how brilliant Beck was in the bike
Oh,
riding.
yes, Beck's brilliant.
I was about to say that. I was like,
yeah,
you're just saying how good I was, Michael.
Yeah, well, I remember the time when the team from Philips, their international team, was talking about the ICU of the future and the potential and the key attributes it needed. And then you told your story, Beck, and all those guys and all those academics threw away their notepads and thought they were coming at this in the wrong kind of way. So, Beck, thank you for your early part on this journey. And again, thank you for coming along today, mate. But can I just start by just asking about, from you, you know, how long were you in ICU?
So I've been in ICU twice now. So I was there for my LVAD and I was there for my transplant, and both times were around a month or two, I guess, a month each time. So I've probably spent quite a few months in ICU all up. Yeah.
And what do you remember most about that experience?
What don't I mean, it was probably one of the biggest things in my memory of my whole journey, actually. And that's purely because it's the most critical time, but it's also the most scariest. And for me personally, it's just little things like, you know, the lights never turning off, and the sounds, and constantly thinking that people around you are dying, and, you know, looking at four walls and things. It's actually probably the one thing that's mentally taken longer for me to heal from. If I have to say anything has taken any time to heal, it's probably more so from the ICU stay.
I remember when you were telling your story and you were saying the continual alarms that were going off, and how even to this day you're very conscious of noises or alarms going off or sprinkler systems.
Actually, I have to admit, I wasn't going to watch that video that you saw earlier. When I first saw that, it gave me a lot of PTSD, and I said to Stein, I'm like, I'm going to enter a little bit later because I don't want to watch the video. And I thought I was entering later, but I entered as soon as you started to play the video, and I saw like 2 seconds of it, and the sounds, like, that's how much it's bothered me, you know, and I only saw like 2 seconds of it. So
Well,
It's yeah,
yeah,
it's a lot.
And the last thing we want to do is actually take you back to that time, which actually makes this very difficult. And I guess a thank you for your bravery and going through that. But it does highlight the point that an experience in ICU for the fact that it saved you, that the memories last a long time, don't they?
Oh, I think I don't think they will ever go away. And I want to also say that while I've had not the best experience in ICU, and there are things that I've taken from that, and that's probably added to my PTSD, there have been a lot of great people that I've met in ICU, like the doctors and the nurses that looked after me and obviously saved my life. Like I would not put anything else apart from me just saying thank you to those people and being very grateful at a hard time looking after someone who's critically unwell. And I think I have an ICU booklet now that, you know, I'm able to go back and look at all those hard times and see how far I've come as well. So it is something that I've taken, and probably, you know, like you've just seen, I'm not very healed from it, but I am grateful for the experiences that I've had.
And on that, Beck, of all the things that you've experienced and for us to all to learn from that, what sort of changes do you think would have the greatest impact?
I think, I mean, I've actually spoken to a few friends, just to see what their opinions of ICU are. And a lot of people haven't actually experienced ICU, which is why I wanted to ask them. And they've all said that ICU is obviously a place for people who are critically ill, and that the care that they have there is what needs to happen, obviously. But I said to them, okay, so what if you were awake in ICU for like over a month? Is there anything that you would feel like you need to change? And they all said, oh, okay, yeah, that's different. That's a different way of looking at it, because you just think of someone who in ICU, they are critically ill and they're probably, you know, in a coma, or they're not awake, they're not alive enough to be speaking most of the time. But for someone like us, we were awake for like a month. We got to hear everything that was going on around you. You got to see everything that was going on around you. And I think if we didn't change like the whole of ICU, definitely little things like the sounds. I mean, the sounds are something that's so triggering to lots of patients who even just go into hospital, not even into ICU. It's a trigger point for people. And I think the sleep is a huge part of healing, and that's really hard when there are constant noises and there's no night or day. It's just very much day. The lights don't really change. And I think also having the more stimulation, I guess, of instead of looking at 4 white walls all the time, like have something that can, you know, stimulate the brain a little bit more, instead of it just letting it wander into nightmares and like delirium side of stuff, where you genuinely think that people are trying to kill you. Like I thought that nurses were trying to kill me, and at some stages, like I know that I probably wasn't that nice to some of the nurses, and I really couldn't help it. Like I really thought that I was in danger. And but also just like, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but it's also like so important, because it's just little things that can change someone's day dramatically.
I remember one of the other people that helped us through the planning stage, it was Colin Manderson. He always tells the story that the biggest impact on him was he felt like he was bound the whole time in ICU because of the tubes appropriately and all the electrical sort of stuff. And he's such a character. He said the day he had all the tubes and he can get up and go to the bathroom for the first time was more important to him than his wedding day. So, it just shows the extremes there. But look, Beck, I just want to again thank you for your input, those insights you provided, and also the fact that you've been such a great ambassador for this project throughout. It's really been so important. And guys, just so you know, this is all being funded, you know, through public support, additional support, and through some opportunities that Stein and John have put applications towards. And we've generated just over $1 million worth of non-health funding to support this initiative. And you played an important role, Beck, and Geoff and Roneen as well, and sharing their stories have all contributed so importantly to all this. So again, Beck, thank you for your time today. I'm sorry you had to watch that video again. That wasn't the intent, and appreciate your contribution to help improve the quality of life of so many people as a result of all this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm so grateful to be a part of this, honestly. And I think I want to keep continue on trying to help and trying to push this project, because I do genuinely think it needs to change.
Thanks, Beck. This is my final piece, so I'll throw back to John, if I can say, and this is probably more from standing on a pulpit, I suppose, but I think the opportunity out of all this, from the way the foundation sees this and the public that we turn to, is it's not often you can be part of something of such innovation in such an important area. And with what's happened to the world over the past 2 or 3 years, the ICU has never been more relevant in the population's life. So if we can play a role to improve it by 20%, let's say, by providing a more calming, peaceful space as much as possible, it'll be a game changer. And for us to be part of this, which could influence global attitudes into this area, and so that no longer will, you know, the survival of people being absolutely critical of what it's all about, but to know that people can recover even better and perhaps get out a little bit earlier, but also along the way make the environment even a little bit more pleasant from the heroes like yourselves who give your lives to saving the lives of others. So I hope this is a moment for all of us.
Michael and Beck, thanks very much. Again, as Beck says, it's only through the great work of the intensive care and the surgical team that she's there to tell the story. She's also very modest. She's won a whole pile of medals as well. She does modelling, so she's making use out of every breath she's got. But we have left her with some long-term sequelae, and that's what it's about, making it better, not just for the patient, but also for the relatives. So I'm going to swing across now over to Roneen and Geoff, Roneen and Geoff Fletcher. Many of you will know them and remember Geoff's time in the intensive care. But before, I'll just summarise that Geoff is a Kiwi, but despite that, we decided we'd help him out. He's had heart failure back from 2010, 2014, had a defib, was going to go to New Zealand. On the early June 2016, went in for an echo, and his echo was appalling. It was about an ejection fraction of 5%. He was still standing upright, and he came in on the 1st of July to ICU, where Bruce, Thompson, David, myself, and the rest of the team intubated him, put lines in, put tubes in. Over the next month or two, he went on to ECMO, he went on to VADs, BiVADs. The RVAD failed, was replaced, and then went home with BiVADs, came back in, was transplanted. And you know, again, like Beck, great testimony to the surgical and ICU, the multidisciplinary team of Prince Charles that makes us Australia's leading cardiac hospital. But I thought rather than talking just to patients, we'd talk to Roneen, the relative, because the relative is the one that remembers everything. Again, the patient has these horrible flashbacks, but it really impacts. So Roneen, thanks for chatting to us this morning. I guess if we can just cast your mind back to the day that you were told you're going to have to leave the Royal Brisbane and come over to Prince Charles. I remember it in the middle of the evening. What were your thoughts as you're arriving in the intensive care? Did you ever think you were going to get this man to New Zealand?
No. Well, I guess when they decided it was, they came down and said he's very sick. I just thought he was moaning and groaning, and they said he'd be in for 5 days. So driving up Gympie Road and had the ambulance go past you, it was very overwhelming. And then I'll be honest, it was, I think, David Platts, John, and also Bruce Thompson. I'll make you laugh. I couldn't understand a word John said, but it sounded, it was like it was pretty bad. And I guess from there, it was, I'd always had kept very positive about it. I didn't realise the extent of how bad he actually was, of when you actually did take him in to ICU. That ICU stint 5 days ended up being 5.5 months. So it was a very long road, and also being in that ICU, it was a biggest wake-up call for even myself. It was things that I was not expecting at all.
So before we talk about, you know, how Geoff got on in the intensive care, what did it feel like to you as a relative in the intensive care? I mean, obviously, great staff that you and Beck have all talked about, trying to make it good. What were the things as you got into that place, other than the fact that your husband was critically ill? What were the things that kind of sprung to mind to you the first time you get into that unit?
Okay, the first thing I went into that unit, you walk in, and I guess this is after day 1, and you've got your husband there on ECMO, on dialysis. They called it a Christmas tree. I've never seen so much equipment around a person and think, how can this person ever survive? What is actually going on here? I have to say, even Jayshree, who's on today, did look after Geoff over that 5-month period as well. And I guess from being a relative, people like that really dumbed it down. You guys talk in your language, which means gobbledygoo to the actual families, but to actually write things down and actually speak in black and white instead of in colour when alarms were going off. Don't worry. First thing, why is this happening? What's happening? What's happening? It's okay. It's just this. It's this. So they would actually reassure you all the time. But again, it was very much, it was the overwhelming sensation through it all, thinking how's he ever going to survive this, and how's he going to come out the other end?
So as we know, that was a pretty long journey, Geoff, coming out the other end. He made you work for it. When he started getting better and we started taking the breathing tube out and you got a chance to chat to Geoff again, what was he like? He probably can't remember all of that at that time. What was he like in terms of before he went in?
He was very, he wouldn't believe a lot of things. And he'd be trying to tell me things that, as he'd tell me that the terrorists were back in there last night, trying to shoot everyone. He felt like ducking. There was nowhere to actually go. Telling me the blue spaghetti monster was actually coming to get him, which was just pretty much a drive line going in. And then there was another one. He was adamant that although we are Australians, we're not Kiwis, we were going to New Zealand. And he was sure that he was in ICU in a backyard in New Zealand eating red jelly. And to him, it was like so real. The terrorist was actually a trolley that had a bung wheel. So as soon as that trolley was moving, he was like ducking and actually going for cover.
It's amazing something so simple as a trolley can really freak someone out whilst they're sitting on ECMO or BiVads, but the one thing that's making them really worried is not the fact that their heart's not working or the fact that they're attached to more medical equipment than you can imagine, but it was a trolley and it just set off, like Beck said, the noise has just set something off inside this brain that was all a bit confused.
Yeah. The other thing that he did very much struggle with, and having photos of it as well, he was like holding his own press conference and every single morning with like 10 to 12 doctors all sitting there talking about him. He had a breathing tube in, so he actually couldn't speak, but he has got a set of ears and could hear absolutely everything that was being said at the time. So, of course, he actually thinks the worst, where that's very overwhelming and daunting, not even just for him, but also for family members that were in there when that was happening.
I remember a photograph Geoff's given a number of us. It's taken from his breakfast tray, and it looks to this panoramic view of the intensivist, the surgeon, the nurse, the physio, the dietitian, the OT, the speechy. It was very much like being inside John Malkovich. Is the great film. So you know, it was a very, very long road, as we've said, and I've summarised 5 months very poorly, I'm certain. He got home, and again, as you've always said, great testimony to the ICU and the surgical teams, etc. His heart works. You know, is he back to normal?
And I guess, okay, this is where it gets really, really hard. Okay, it has been 5 years, and you think, as Beck said, the video as well, yeah, it hit a lot of nerves. He had to actually walk out when that was playing. The heart's great. The heart's really, really good, but the head is so broken. The PTSD, the long-term effects, like even being in a pet barn store and there was a dog with a high bark, it actually set him off into a complete spin because it reminded me of him alarms actually going off in ICU. And I remember you telling us, John, even once that returned Vietnam vets, ICU patients, their PTSD can actually even be worse. So if I would say to Geoff, we're leaving now, no, he can't deal. He'll have a complete meltdown. But if I said to him, we're leaving at 12:45, he has time to actually get that into his head and actually work out, yep, I can actually do this. So although the heart's good, it is still very hard dealing with the panic attacks. But also, I think because of he had 7, 8 open sternums, 9 cardiac arrests. His memory loss is also very bad. So I do need to write things down. Or if he says I told him that, I just deny it anyway. So, but again, it's very much, it's hard. It is still a long road. So yeah.
Thanks for that, and please feel free to not answer if any of these make you feel uncomfortable. That's hard for Geoff, but it's also very hard for you, Roneen. That's not just affected Geoff. I think in terms of your work or Geoff's work, is that back to normal?
Geoff's still not back at work. Even the anxiety, if he was to go to work to get into a car, he could drive down the road, but as soon as there's any sort of major traffic or delays, either say Bruce Highway or Gympie Road, he feels like everything is coming in on top of him and has a panic attack. His electric scooter has been his life, where he can actually scooter around and actually get out. So that's for him. For me, I've also been very fortunate that I do work from home. So we do actually have that advantage that we can actually do the both. But again, on any marriage, being at home together 24/7 for a whole year, mate, there's times
5 years.
Well, yeah, what did I say? 25. Yeah, it takes its toll. Like not only on your marriage, on your friendship, like just absolutely everything. It is still hard, and seeing psychiatrists, and we're trying to get there, but it's still, it's never. It just seems like it's never ending.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the ICU, you've helped us with the concept, and what we've tried to do from the ICU, the future, is build it, not as we say with the architect, builder and CEO, but more with the patient and the relative at the centre focus. If there's things obviously outstanding that, despite all those VADs, transplants and sternotomies, you're still alive, Geoff. What would be the 1 or 2 things that you'd like to see from the intensive care that you think, if there was 1 or 2 things we could try and achieve through this, what would they be?
I think even from that is, even for a patient, and Beck may remember this as well, there is so much behind the patient's head, and they've got no control of what they can see, of what's going on behind them, but also the amount of alarms that are going off. Like you're laying in that bed and all you're doing is looking at the ceiling. And I know some of the ICU staff, what they did was get me to get photos of one lot of like family and one of friends, and we laminated it and actually put it on the roof in ICU, so he could actually see something. But to have a future where, as Beck said also, every day is daytime. 3 a.m. in the morning, it's daytime. The lights are bright. So being able to dim rooms, change the actual lighting, even projections up onto, okay, maybe not on a beach or something, but just like different actually things, so they're not just looking at a ceiling. And the main thing is the amount of alarms, and yeah.
Again, Michael reminded us of what Colin was saying when we met with the builders right way back, and Colin said, day after day he'd wake up and the only thing he had to do to keep his mind occupied was join the dots on the roof, and he'd give himself a pattern, and he'd try and find that pattern within the dots on the roof. And it doesn't sound like medically that important, but there's nothing worse than having absolutely nothing to do, particularly when you're sleep deprived and you're going to be there for another month.
Yep, absolutely.
Good. Well, listen, thanks for both of you, and Fletch, thank you as well for staying. I'm sorry again that that video did cause some stramash to both of you. But I think it does summarise that is how you guys see it. It's not overly dramatic. It's built from what you people have told us.
It's bang on, and I really did struggle with that. That was bang on and too close, way too close.
Yeah. So it is way too close, and the hope is that we are going to be able to make this better. Thanks, Roneen. Thanks, Geoff and Beck. Please stay online. We're going to hear from Tami Photinos now. Tami is the Chief Executive at Prince Charles. Not just is she a good Chief Executive, she was also an emergency nurse as well. So she's seen a fair bit of delirium and problems there. Before I introduce her, we were going to have a staff member talk to us, and that staff member, who I wouldn't name, most people at Charlie's will know, but there was a patient who was a lovely patient but became delirious, and she was actually assaulted, and she's had significant long-term ramifications that she's not back at full-time work, which is really sad. She was going to join us but didn't feel up to it. So but I think if we can make this better for the patient, for the relative, it also becomes better for the staff member. Burnout amongst ICU staff, nursing staff particularly, even before COVID was a major issue. So if we can make it even better, we will be able to help the nursing staff. So with that, I'm going to pass over for Tami, who's just going to give us her view of the lie of the land from the Chief Executive at Prince Charles. Thanks, Tami.
Hi, everyone. It's the Executive Director, not the Chief Executive. And I keep saying to John, I know he keeps elevating me to the Chief Executive role, but thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I just want to acknowledge as well just Michael and the Common Good for all the work that they're doing in this space, as well as sharing his story. Roneen and Geoff and Beck, it's quite confronting listening to all of that. And I actually started my career as an intensive care nurse, John, before I went into emergency. So even when I was working in emergency, we transferred a lot of patients to ICU. And, in all the 36 years working here in health, and I've done quite a lot of roles, I have never realised the impact that being in ICU and the wonderful work that, as health professionals we do. I don't think we realise the impact that it has had and the long-term effects. So when I found out, and I've been in Prince Charles for a year now, so when I found out about this project, which has been going on for some time, I was like, oh, this is fantastic. This is like every single person, and I can see the clinicians, I'm sure, in the room there with Andrew, every single clinician should just be behind this 100%, because if we can improve that journey and if we can improve your experience, I think, we're on the right track. I just can't believe the impact. I keep referring to that, and it is, again, quite confronting. And I'm thinking, geez, in my time working in ICU and emergency, if I had that in the back of my mind when I was working, I probably would have done a lot more. So I'm sure that the staff of, behind Jayshree, which, it is world-renowned ICU, I'm sure that they will back this 100%, because every single time we have and learn about this, we're learning something about ourselves as, staff and as well as human beings, and trying to improve that journey. So I think the work is fantastic. This is our way of creating the future for ICU. It's going to be, nationally, worldwide. I think everyone's really interested in this work, and I meet with John and Michael quite frequently. I know sometimes it's annoying, but, I do meet with them frequently just to learn more about it, the questions that I ask, because I think in my role, I need to advocate for this. And I think that you have got the staff, if the staff aren't engaged, it might be because they don't understand it enough. And I think we need to spend a lot more time educating and engaging our staff. And I know I've got the commitment of the ICU and the staff and of Prince Charles in moving this forward. It's a great project. I won't speak too much now, because I think you need to hear from Oystein, because he's been working with the frontline staff and all the researchers, and I'm just so proud that I'm part of it. Even though I've only been here for a year, I've been in health for a long time, and I think, I'm learning every single day. And so thank you so much, especially to our consumers, our patients that have open their hearts and their souls, and knowing that that's quite confronting for you guys, that you're going to be part of this and you're going to help every other single patient that comes through intensive care. So on behalf of Prince Charles, thank you so much for all the work that you do, and all our patients, our staff, and Jayshree will also probably spend a bit more time regarding what is happening with ICU. And I do miss actually being at the front line, so I know that the frontline workers are doing the best that they possibly can. So is there anything else, John, you want me to bring up, or I'll just introduce
No, all I was just going to say was that's great to know you're an ICU nurse. You're missing it. Jayshree will get your number and you'll be on night shift for the next week, if that's all right.
Yeah, well, I'm still registered, so you can call upon me.
There you go. There you go. You heard it here first, ladies and gents. You heard it here first. Tami, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. It's great to have, firstly a clinician at the top, but a clinician that understands. And as Tami said, I guess it's an indictment on myself and Stein as well. We never knew this was as big a problem as it is, because we don't talk to people like Roneen or Beck or Fletch, because they're out of ICU and they're better. And that's what we always thought, they're better, we've fixed them. And one of the things Beck always tells the story, she didn't today, but she said every time she would fall asleep, she'd feel her head going into the pillow and then dissolving through, going through the bed and then dissolving through and then falling to the floor, dissolving through the floor. And she said when she was in intensive care, she couldn't sleep because every time her eyes closed, this happened. And I looked after her like Jayshree and many others, and I didn't know it. And that's my feeling. So I think together, if we realize this is a problem, we can start to make it better. With that, I'm just going to pass over to Stein. As Tami said, he's the person that's actually doing the vast majority of the work. I'm the show off at the front, and that's how you become a professor. But Stein's going to chat about really what we've been doing in the past, and the fact that this is coming to an ICU very, very soon, and we want you to be part of the solution. Stein.
Great. Thanks, John. Hopefully you can all see my screen. Thanks, John and Tami and Michael, but especially Beck, Roneen and Geoff as well. Just a quick warning, I suppose. This presentation does have a few images from ICU. So for Beck, Roneen and Geoff, just letting you know that's coming up in the next 10 minutes or so. So I'm just going to do a very quick summary of the project, background, what we're trying to achieve, why, what we're up to, what the plans are, timeline, those sort of things. So a lot of this has already been summarized. It is a fairly large problem. We know that in Australia, approximately 150,000 patients per year are admitted to ICU, which means that approximately 50% of all Australians will either end up in ICU as a patient or have a family member or close friend in an ICU. It's not cheap. The costs are somewhere between $5,000 to $6,000 per day per patient. And as mentioned earlier, the vast majority of people survive. So the survival rate is excellent. It's the quality of survival that's not always optimal. We know a lot of patients experience delirium. The number varies, but some talk about up to 80% of mechanically ventilated patients experiencing it. But as we've heard, the ongoing and permanent problems that's associated with ICU is large. Large number of patients experiencing PTSD, cognitive impairment, short-term, and sometimes longer term or permanent. Other psychological problems, depression, anxiety are very high. We talked about the ability to return to work, and we talked about family members also being affected by the traumatic experience, but also by having to provide ongoing care afterwards. We know that ICU delirium is associated with some significant negative sequelae. We know that you're more likely to die in ICU and after your ICU admission if you get delirium. We know that people are likely to require longer duration of mechanical ventilation, stay longer in ICU and hospital, more likely to have cognitive impairment, and more likely to experience PTSD. So obviously it's also therefore more costly for the society and for the hospitals. So we talked a lot about patients, but as John mentioned, this project is also about improving how we provide care, so helping staff provide better care as well. We know that the current environment impacts on staff health. We know that staff can leave work in ICU tired, fatigued, get stress or tension headaches. This has all been documented in the literature, especially around the noise and the lack of external views. And as John mentioned, we also know that workplace violence, unfortunately, is very common in ICU. And if you look at the literature, up to 99% of ICU nurses have experienced violence at some point in their career. And in an informal survey done here at the Prince Charles Hospital, that backs it up. The majority of staff had previously been exposed to occupational violence, either verbal aggression or physical. We've also explored this at a different Metro North ICU, and all staff interviewed reported witnessing and or being personally subjected to physical or verbal aggression while working at their ICU. So we know that this is very common, unfortunately. It's becoming normalized and expected, so it's not really reported particularly well, but it does impact significantly on both patients, family members, but also staff especially. So we know that hopefully if we can start reducing the incidence of delirium, we will have good patient outcomes, better patient outcomes, but also improve it for staff. We know that ICU can be quite traumatic for patients. It's different, they perceive it differently to how staff perceive it. After interviewing staff and many patients, they all tell a very similar story. As staff members, we know that ICU can be busy and stressful, but it's a safe workplace. But a lot of our patients talk about a sinister or traumatic or scary environment that creates a lot of fear. And some of these are ongoing, as you've heard. It's important that, you know, both Beck and Roneen talked about this. The patients are all telling us that the care provided is excellent and empathetic. There's been no issue raised with this. We know that the care provided is as good as it gets, and all patients are grateful to be alive. But when you start digging a bit further, that's when you start hearing some of these stories that Roneen, Geoff, and Beck have kindly shared. Some of the key problems that the patient's experience as well as staff experience have helped us identify, and that we're trying to address as part of this project includes, as you've heard, it's a very, very noisy environment. There's a lack of natural daylight in many of the bed spaces, either because the internal have no window, or alternatively because the windows are behind the patient, so the patients can't access them. So therefore, it's artificial light, and there's limited difference at times between night and day. And I think both Beck and Roneen talked about sleep deprivation, which is very, very common in ICU, which is linked with the loss of circadian rhythms, which is again linked with delirium. A lot of patients talked about, and family members as well, having a limited understanding of what was happening to them, their diseases, what all the equipment were, what all the alarms meant, and the inability to communicate some of their wishes was also raised. We know that some of the ICU technology can be a little bit outdated. Patients talked about a lack of autonomy and the bland, boring or sterile environment with white or creamy white walls, and an inability to personalize the environment. So the environment is static, and it's the same for all patients regardless of their needs and regardless of the changing needs, because we know needs change from when they're critically unwell and sedated versus when they're in the rehab phase. So to highlight a couple of these things, so how noisy is the average ICU? According to the literature, and we've done studies at Charlie's, which is basically, it's same here as in all other reported ICUs. The average sits at about 60 to 65 decibel, which is similar to putting the bed right next to a busy freeway, which is not really a concern if the noise level is constant, because when you jump on a plane, the hum of the engine is annoying, but you get used to it. The key problem is that there's multiple peaks that are very, very high, over 90 to 100 decibels, and most of them come from alarms. Not a lot of difference between day and night, slightly quieter, but still the same issue with lots of peak sounds happening all the time. And if you look at the peak sounds, they're actually very similar to power tools being used 10 to 15 meters away from the patients when they go off, because all the alarms and all the noise, unfortunately, is happening right next to the patient's head. So as you can see here, these are some of the equipment, and they're all within the meter of the patient's head. And all of these create mechanical noise, but also alarms. And there's a few other as well surrounding the patients. So we decided to do an audit on the alarms at Charlie's, just to get a baseline and a better understanding of what the problem is. So we did it for the month of October in 2019. There were 600,000 alarms, and this is from one piece of equipment only. So this was only from the monitors, because it's much easier to get the data from them, which equates to 1,000 alarms per bed per day, or each monitor creating a new alarm every 80 seconds or so. So it goes off a lot. 80 seconds, a new alarm starts. No difference between 3 a.m. and 3 p.m. It was fairly constant day and night. And that's all well and good if all of those alarms are critical and needs to be actioned. But when we looked at how many of those alarms were actually actioned, unfortunately only 5% were actioned, and the other 95% were ignored or potentially unnecessary alarms. So they weren't actioned. And I suppose we've known that noise is an issue in ICU for quite a while, but we haven't really addressed it, unfortunately. And this is a common problem around the world. Very briefly on light, we know that light is essential for synchronizing our body clock, so to maintain our circadian rhythms. And we know that most ICU patients lose the circadian rhythms very, very quickly. It's not just the, I guess, the intensity of the light. We know that the intensity during the day is not enough to entrain your circadian rhythms, but we also know that at nighttime it's too bright, so people start losing the circadian rhythms because of that. There's also the timing of it and also the color temperature. We know that we've evolved around the sun rising, getting gradually brighter in the morning, more blue light in the morning stimulate wakefulness, and less blue light at night, helping you fall asleep. But in the ICU, all of that is fairly constant. And there's actually a lot of blue lights being emitted from monitors, etc. And lack of natural light and views was one of the key things that pretty much all patients identified as one of the key concerns they had. And as mentioned, it heavily impacts on the patient's sleep. They sleep on average 3 to 5 hours per day, so that's over a 24-hour period. And if you spend a lot of time in ICU, generally your sleep-wake cycle is completely lost or reversed. So a lot of times they sleep more during the day, or approximately 50-50. Some studies talk about a median duration of unbroken sleep being 5 to 10 minutes. So every 10 minutes or so, you get woken up by something, whether it's an alarm or staff talking, the phone ringing, whatever. And then you try to go back to sleep again, but you're always in that light sleep phase. So we talk about obviously number of alarms, but we also know a lot of patient care activities per night. Again, a lot of them essential, but maybe not all of them. Some of them might just be following a tick sheet. Again, decreased sleep is linked with mortality and ongoing mental, physical, and cognitive problems. So I guess, how can we address these things? And there's obviously a lot of things we can't change. We can't change how unwell our patients are. We can't change a lot of these things, but we can actually change the physical environment we put the patient into. And we can change it to make sure that we actually address the key issues that the patients have raised, patient and family members. So we've done a co-design process where we had clinicians, researchers, industry partners, and put them in the same room as some of our patients. We got Beck here as one of the patients who attended. So we can all hear the same story and we can all develop problems around it. We've gone through various design iterations, and we've been assigned a couple of bed spaces in our current ICU that we will upgrade. So we'll be beds 19 and 20. The 2 current simulation bed spaces. We're currently working with the builders and the architects on coming up with the ideal solution for them, because we need to retrofit and fit it in within current walls, etc. So these are some of the early drawings, and hopefully the architectural drawings will be finalized in the next 2 to 4 weeks. So there's this design side of things, and then there's the technology, and we know that technological progress is happening very quickly. We're moving from the current situation towards a more quiet and eventually potentially a silent ICU. And by silent, it doesn't mean that everything is completely dead silent. It just means that the alarms going off next to the patient's head currently will be moved, so there will be more silence around the patient themselves. We know that technology exists where we can actually integrate all the monitors, ventilators, infusion devices, send the information directly to the caregiver. We know we can send alarms, a lot of the alarms away from the patient, again, send it directly to the caregiver. And just by moving the monitors 4 meters away from the patients, we can reduce the noise level at the patient's head by about 7 to 10 decibel, which is a halving of how they perceive the sound. We know that the number of alarms at Charlie's is very, very high, as it is around the world. But we've worked with Philips to come up with a plan to how we can just do some simple reconfiguration of the monitors. and we're confident that we can reduce the number of alarms by 50% just by doing some targeted changes to address the issues that we identified in the audit. So we've been working with the ICU staff and the nurses, and this will be implemented from the end of this month. And there's information that will be provided to all the staff. There will be donor lighting solutions, there will be patient engagement on virtual visiting, ways to stimulate the patient, keep them more engaged, as well as the family members. Lots of other solutions. I won't go through them here, but the key thing is they've all been developed around the needs of the patients. I'm going to wrap it up now. There's lots of work happening in the design of the actual bed spaces, and we do need everyone's input. So please have a think about all of these things and come and talk to us and let us know what your thoughts are. But there's also ongoing work on how we can evaluate this and continually improve this. So if anyone is interested in this, please get in touch. And that's it for me. So I'm going to hand it back to John, who's going to introduce Jayshree.
Lovely. Thanks for the graphics too. I saw something coming up saying that this meeting would close. If it does close, just relink back into the same thing. We've not got much, but we've kept the best wine to the last. Jayshree Lavana, the director of the unit, has been a great advocate for the programme right since she joined. And I think obviously as director, she sees firsthand from the medical staff, but also the nursing and the allied health staff, what's going on, how we are a leader, and how we can do even better. So Jayshree, thanks for your help, and we'll pass the microphone over to you, please.
Thank you, John and Stein, for organising this, and thank you to Tami and Michael for joining. But most importantly, thank you to Beck, Roneen and Fletch, because, you know, we look at lots of hard parameters as part of research in ICU, and it's very uncommon that we actually get to hear what patients feel and to hear about the impact so many years down the track is really eye-opening, certainly for me, and I'm sure some of my colleagues. So thank you very much for not only doing that, but for your bravery to go through, to relive perhaps each time when we ask you to speak about it. So much appreciated. I'm going to share just a couple of slides very briefly, just to give you an outline, and I think Stein's covered a lot of it. So I won't take up too much time. Hopefully you can see the slides.
Yep.
Okay. So just going through, in terms of implementation of the ICU of the Future project at TPCH. As John mentioned, we've been involved from the very beginning, I think CCRG, as well as with Michael and team, in terms of thinking about what we want the ICU to look like, which not only caters to or meets the requirements of our patients, but also makes it a place that is safe for our staff members as well. Some of the numbers that Stein and John mentioned in terms of staff burnout are very real, and they're only just emerging. As I mentioned, outcome measures like survival, etc., there's lots of evidence on that. But I think what we don't have, or what is emerging now more, is the less hard parameters, I call them, like anxiety, PTSD, occupational health injuries for our staff. So what we are looking at doing is the 2 bed spaces in ICU 19 and 20 have been allocated to be retrofitted, as Stein has mentioned. And interestingly, these 2 bed spaces, obviously we allocated these to ensure that at least this is a project that will go on whilst we continue to deliver care to our patients in all the other bed spaces. So keeping that in mind and allowing that process to continue, we opt for these 2 beds. Additionally, I think the beds have no natural light, no windows. So I think that, in fact, gives a lot of opportunity to test out some of the things that Stein's just shown you about screens and images using AV equipment in a more innovative manner. The initial part, some of the initial work has already been done, as you've seen from Stein's report, with the alarm reconfiguration work that we've done with Philips, and we hope to implement that very soon. And that itself, I am hopeful, will help reducing noise levels. Thereafter, the aim is obviously for the work to start at this stage in April, May, but of course it's flexible given our current situation with COVID, and that we will determine collaboratively as a team as to the best time frame to start that. Once it has started and the 2 bays are fitted, there'll be a lot more work done as well in terms of the post-implementation work, in terms of what we find, feedback from staff, from patients. I would encourage all the team members to participate and certainly give their unique insights and knowledge and experience towards improving our intensive care unit areas. Certainly, I think we've gained some insight from our patients. And I think another second important aspect is actually from staff injuries as well. And if we can do something to try and reduce those, it would be, I think, a tremendous step forward. It's an excellent opportunity, in fact, various opportunities thus far and going forward, to not only improve the care we provide, but to have longer lasting effects for our patients, not just regain physical health, but mental and psychological health as well. And also for us, give our staff members the best possible environment to work in, to care, and to enable the best care possible for our patients. I think I quite like this quote, is opportunities are like sunrises. If you wait too long, you'll miss them. So I would urge all the staff members to use these opportunities and come forth with any ideas that you will have. And I know that there's a lot of experience amongst our staff members. Essentially, I think we hope to achieve what we've set out for. And it's said that success is never an accident, it is a choice. So I think I urge all the team members to make that choice. With that, I will hand back to John, and I thank everyone who's spoken before me for their time. I think, John, thank you for the opportunity.
No worries. Thanks, Jayshree. And again, firstly, Jayshree normally calls me Sunrise, so when she said that, I just thought she was talking to me. Look, we do work as a district, and we have been very fortunate to work with our colleagues over at Redcliffe as well. Even more fortunate to steal one of their best staff with Jabil Latu. Jabil's going to talk about what they've been doing at Redcliffe with the redevelopment, which is not specifically ICU the future, but we have been working with them, and I think together we can achieve a lot of good things. Jabil, thank you.
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. I just want to steal a couple of minutes of your time to just provide a case study, and that is using Redcliffe's redevelopment as an example of how we can utilise some key points they had with their change management program, and how we can best utilise those points to optimise the implementation of the project here. So very briefly, Redcliffe underwent a complete redevelopment of their whole entire unit. Now, this involved moving an entire ICU from the 2nd floor to the 6th floor in a day. So this very big disruptive change required a lot of preparation and a lot of support from the leadership team. So just utilising Lewin's change model just to keep me on track, they went through an unfreeze stage. Now, in this first phase, the ICU of the future was able to collaborate with Redcliffe, and some of the key points that Stein spoke to, we were able to instill these change factors into Redcliffe on a slightly smaller scale, but still enough to impact change. Now, in this first phase, leadership is the key. So communication, education opportunities, management, and leadership support. So it's understandable that there is resistance to change, and that's fine. There will always be, it's human nature. It is just key to just figure out the root of that resistance and have the common goal, which is obviously improving patient outcomes and the patient experience. Now, as they stepped into the second phase of their change, it is the implement phase. This involves them moving temporarily to another unit and then the redevelopment of their existing unit. As I mentioned before, they took a redesign to their physical bed spaces with Stein's factors in mind. They ended up with a lot more walls and single rooms and a whole new floor plan and lighting and sound masking and all of these fabulous things that are great for our patients, but obviously very different for our staff to utilise. It is very important in this point to remember the common goal. So education, delirium prevention, management, and follow-up process were on the key front for staff there. Fortunately, these factors were embodied by their leadership team, CNs in general. So every day on the floor, staff were able to actually go to CNs for information, for timelines, for support. I will mention that the unit that they did move into was structured like a general ward. So if you can imagine a 4-bedded bay and a long, long hall that isn't in line perfectly, there was a lot of resistance. There was a lot of teething process to that. So having a really strong leadership team to back up staff and really hear concerns was really imperative and important. And I think that's one takeaway point we can utilise while implementing these 2 bed spaces, is just supporting staff and having the opportunity for everybody to voice their opinions for the common goal, which is our patients. The final phase that they moved into, which is now what they're in now, is reviewing the current bed spaces they have. So they're now back in their brand new flash new unit. They have all of these new fantastic factors in place to help improve patient outcomes. And with ICU of the Future's collaboration, we can go back through and review how well they have gone with implementing these new processes. One of the huge takeaway points that they were able to capitalise on was the nurse-led care strategy. So fortunately, the staff there really understood how delirium can impact particularly their patient cohort and the safety of their staff members. So staff really are driven and centred around delirium management and prevention being the key. So day-night cycles, bundling cares overnight, reducing noise, providing outdoor lighting when able. These are really important factors, just as much as our usual treatments are. They see daylight therapy as important as an antibiotic. So our key takeaway points that we can utilise from Redcliffe that we can use here at TPCH is just appreciating the clear relationship between the process of change itself and leadership. So if you're a leader, a clinician on the floor, you are a key point for making this project work and improving these patient outcomes. It will always come from you. The forces driving change versus forces resisting change, getting everybody on the same page and really coming back to that common goal. Communication, top-down support, common goal and values, staff support and education. So as previously mentioned, we're going to have a lot of opportunities for staff to be involved. We welcome all and every feedback. And we hope to work with you in the future to implementing a safe and smooth transition into these bed spaces. And that is all I will take from you. Thank you, John.
Jabil, thanks very much. Beautiful summary at the end of it. I think the key things I heard there was nurse-led strategy. This is, the nurse is the person that spends most of the time at the bedside, not the doctor. It's frequently the nurses that tell us of the delirium because if we're moving too quickly. Like Jabil said, we focus on antibiotic dosage, get the right dose right, try and prevent renal failure. we should just be working just as hard to prevent delirium, just as hard to give them the right dose of the environment, because we know it affects it, and we've listened to Beck, and we've listened to Roneen. We haven't listened to our staff member who didn't feel up to it, but this causes problems. We lead the world in cardiac ICU and other intensive care, and we can lead in this field too. So it really just remains for me to thank you all. This is your ICU. This is your opportunity to make a difference. The rest of the world, as Tami said, is watching us. We've got hospitals in America, hospitals in New South Wales, hospitals in Turkey, all wanting to copy it. The more you get involved, the better this project will be. So please reach out to us. If we've got things wrong, tell us. If you think of ideas that can make it better, tell us. We want to make it better so that when Beck comes back, as she says, in 15 or 20 years' time for a radio heart lung, it's better. When Geoff comes back, the next time he goes to New Zealand, it's better. So with that in mind, you're going to see a lot of stuff. But this was really just to give you an overview of how big the problem is and how you can make a difference. So I know you're all busy. We're very, very grateful for everyone for joining. But as everyone says, specifically to Beck, to Geoff, and to Roneen, and to the rest of you. So with that, adieu, and we'll see you around the traps. Thanks very much.